Hi, and welcome back to That Makes Sense, the second part. So what we're going to cover in this section, we're going to be thinking in a little bit more depth about the senses, and the senses that we're going to focus on for this unit, the sense of touch, the sense of vision, and the sense of hearing. So we're going to think a little bit, you'll need your workbook to hand, because we're going to be thinking about whether your child is over or under responsive to touch, hearing and vision, and also we'll be exploring some strategies that can be useful depending on whether your child is over or under responsive in these areas. So the first sensation that I want to talk about in a little bit more depth is touch discrimination. So there's different kinds of touch sensors in the skin. So some of these might be on the surface of the skin, and some of them might be a little bit deeper in the skin. And they pick up different kinds of touch messages. So some of them will pick up information about tickle and light touch. Other sensors pick up information about pain or about deeper touch. And again, just things like the hairs on the skin as well also might pick up if something's brushing past them. So touch discrimination is actually a really useful skill. It helps us to recognise things just by touch alone. We don't need to look. We can pinpoint touch on the body and locate pain. It also helps us to keep a firm grip on the things that we're holding. So if we've got a hot drink, we can feel it. We know we need to keep the same amount of pressure on it. We're not going to let go of it. And it also means that we can manipulate things that we can't see. So it means that we can do things like fasten our top button, even though we can't see it. We can find things in a pocket or bag. We don't have to tip everything out to have a look at it. If we've got a pain, we can tell somebody fairly accurately where it is and where it hurts. And again, it just lets us grade how much force we use. So if we're handling, fragile pets or babies, or we've got delicate objects, we can pick them up and we know not to squeeze too hard. The other touch system that we've got is a protective touch system, and this is very much part of our survival system, and it is here to warn us about potential danger. And it triggers a very, very strong reaction and a big surge of adrenaline that helps us to deal with the threat. So again, this system is something that you would need, if we were in a jungle, or if we were, somewhere where we're likely to have poisonous insects or creatures that might suddenly land on us. So it's triggered particularly by kind of sudden, unexpected light touch. And that is again like how it would feel if something like this creature here or a spider landed on you. And it like I say, it gives you this big burst of adrenaline and it gets you ready to do something about it. So either you're there ready to try and remove the insect or to shake it off or to run away from the situation. But when children and young people have got senses that get muddled, this really strong safety response can just be triggered by everyday things. So, just having a haircut or getting dressed or having a shower can trigger this same sort of really, really strong response and like put you into this fight or flight mode. And again, a lot of children will say that light touch can actually feel quite painful to them. So I want you to get the booklet. If you can turn to the touch page, it should be the first one in the booklet. So I'm going to just turn the webcam off in a second so that you can see the slide a little bit better. And I want you to go through all of the statements on here and tick if it's true for your child. Even if they don't do exactly what's on the slide, but they do something that's really similar and you think it's to do with touch, I would still tick it. And then when you've finished, if you've got more ticks in the under section, then tick the mostly under box at the bottom. If you've got more ticks in the over, then tick the mostly over one. Okay, I'm going to move on, but if you haven't had a chance to finish it all, if you could just pause the presentation here and just finish that off and then start again when you're ready. Okay, so we're going to be thinking now about some strategies around touch when children under and over respond. So for children who over respond to touch sensation, as we were just saying before with the thing about protective touch, because it's unexpected and light touch that really triggers this unpleasant, horrible feeling response. It's much better to use a deep pressure. Deep pressure is much better tolerated. So again, you can either, if you need to assist your child, if they're younger and they need a lot of assistance still with dressing and washing and that sort of thing, try to use a firm pressure with them when you're doing that. I think sometimes it seems a little counterintuitive, because if you know you've got a child who doesn't like to be touched, it's almost like, feels like common sense to try not to touch them too much, but actually a firm touch is much better tolerated. And for that reason, sometimes children prefer it if dad supports them, because dads tend to be a little bit firmer when they're doing that. So the other thing you can do with deep pressure is you can kind of use it as a bit of a prep before you're actually doing a task that's got a lot of touch aspects to it. So again, it's things like, doing your teeth, having your hair brushed, getting dressed. All of these self-care have got a lot of touch components to them. So when I'll show the video at the end of this slide, and that gives you a few ideas for some deep pressure things to try as well. So like I say, it's in the same way that if you hurt yourself and you kind of give it a little bit of a rub if you bang your arm, deep pressure sort of scrambles the nasty light touch feeling, and it just helps to reduce it a little bit. The other thing we can do as well is pre-warn. So there's an example at the top of the slide about a now and next board, which helps as well. So if children are expecting touch, it's less likely to cause that panic response. And again, what we sometimes say as well is try and keep it the same every time. So if a child really doesn't like to do their teeth, try and pre-warn them, keep it the same every time. Sometimes it's useful to sing a little song. It can just be something that you make up yourself. Keep it the same every time, and the song will help them to know how long it's going to last for and when it's going to finish, and that'll help them to deal with it a little bit more. Again, some sensitive children really need to feel in control of a situation. So even if they're not old enough to be able to do the task for themselves, and we do find that when children do get older, usually these things resolve a bit when they're able to do it themselves. Try and give them some choice. So can they choose what product they're going to use in the shower? You could give them a choice of, you can have a shower now or a shower in half an hour. It's just anything that you can do just so that they feel they've got a little bit of control and a little bit of choice. It can make a difference. And in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit as well about gradual desensitization. So I'm not going to talk about that now. We're going to cover that. So on the other hand, children who under-respond to touch sensation, so these are the children who are struggling with touch, with tactile discrimination, they need to really work on this skill, and it is something that the more you practice, the easier it gets. So it's best to do things where you're trying to find things without looking. So things like a sensory bin, and we'll talk a bit about those in the video to give you a demonstration. Finding small things hidden in Play-Doh, or popping a few toys in a bag and getting them to find without looking. All of these things can help to build on these skills. So let's just play the video now. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to show you how to use a gym ball or a therapy ball for deep pressure. So first of all, you're going to want to get the young person, this is Benji who's helping us here. He's going to lie on his tummy. I want you to lie on something like a firm surface, but on something that's fairly soft. So we're just using a yoga mat because that's something that we've got at home. So again, don't buy anything special, but if you've got something like a soft rug that your child can lie on, or you can even just put a duvet on the floor so that it's a firm surface underneath, but then it's got something soft for them to lie on. If they're on a tummy, that's better. So I'm going to use this ball. I'm just going to roll it on Benji's back and on his legs, and I'm going to ask him to tell me how much pressure to use. So I'm going to start off using does that feel okay?
Yeah, about that.
That's okay. I'm just going to roll it slowly and firmly, so up and down his back a little bit, and then up and down his legs as well. Is that okay? Yeah. And let's do that a few times. Again, get your child to tell them if they want you to press a little bit harder, a little bit softer, or if they want how long you want them to keep going. So would you like a bit more there?
Okay, about 5 more rolls.
5 more rolls, okay. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. finish there?
Yeah.
So practicing to tell the difference between different textures without looking really helps to develop touch discrimination, and this is really helpful not only for everyday tasks such as dressing, being able to feel those buttons without looking that we were talking about earlier, and it also will help your child to not need to touch everything as well as looking at it when they're out and about, but also as well, if we can build on this skill and people are better able to tell what's touching them and where, they're less likely to have a panic response if they suddenly feel an unexpected touch. Okay, so to make a sensory bin, I would start off with two textures that are really different. And again, I wouldn't buy anything special for this. I would just use things that you've got around the house. So for this, I'm using some very old popcorn that I've made, and this is soft and bumpy. And I'm also using some magnetic fridge letters because again, they feel really different. They're quite firm and they're smooth as well. I think to make this activity work really well, it's really good to tap into your child's interests. So, you can use things like if your child's really interested in dinosaurs, you could hide some plastic dinosaurs in sand, or if they really love insects, you could hide plastic insects in dried leaves, something like that. If you have a look on websites like Pinterest, there's lots and lots of really good ideas for making sensory bins, so you can personalise it a little bit more to your child. And if you think as well about your child's needs, again, if you've got a child who tends to put everything in their mouth, then either maybe choose two edible objects, but again, make sure the texture is different on that. Or again, you might want to avoid really small objects if they're going to use those as well. And again, you can use these because I've got letters in here. I could always make an activity of it. We could work on spelling. You could hide the letters of your child's name in here and they could spell their name afterwards. So other activities that you can do as well. So again, things like hiding things in Play-Doh. Now, I've made this at home. I've had to freestyle the ingredients a little bit in lockdown, so it's not quite as it might be normally. But again, if you've got a slightly firmer Play-Doh, this is really good for working on hand strength as well. So you just need small things to hide in here. And again, it's doing it by feel alone. So I have hidden pennies in here. Just as a word of caution as well, I know from doing this quite a few times, most children want to know exactly how many items it is that you've hidden in here. So make sure you count them first because they'll really want to know. But again, you could use things like beads, and you could pretend that's something like mining for diamonds or whatever in Minecraft, or you could use, again, plastic figures, that sort of thing. So just put that to the side. I'll show you the last activity. Oh, very sticky. So the last activity you do is just getting some little everyday objects around the house and putting them in a drawstring bag. So I would start off with about 5 items that, again, ones that feel really different. So again, we've got random things here. We've got Duplo. We've got a plastic figure. We've got a squishy. Got a pom-pom. I've got a toy car, and I've got a rubber as well. So I would start, so then you get your child to feel without looking and tell them which one they're going to find. So make sure they tell you before they found it. So I'm going to find the car. And there you go. And again, if the child finds this really difficult, I would start off with things that feel really different, and maybe just start off with 3 items. And as they get better at doing this, you can always add things that feel a little bit more similar. You can have more and more things in it, and that's going to really help to develop their skills. So one other thing that's just worth a mention as well, if your child doesn't like to close their eyes, obviously you do want them to close their eyes for this to make sure they're just using their sense of touch. You could always cover the tray over with a tea towel or something like that, and that way they're not closing their eyes, but they can't see their hands either when they're doing it. And actually that does make it feel a little bit harder. As well, when they've got really good at doing this with just the 2 items, you could add extra things in as well. So say for this one, I would maybe add something like some Rice Krispies or some cereal loops, something like that, so it feels quite different from what's in there as well, and it's just making that challenge a little bit harder for them. So by getting used to it, we can get used to a sensation if it's something that we experience a lot of the time. And we do find a lot of children, as they grow older, sometimes as their sensory systems mature, sometimes things that were a big problem when they were younger can get better just with age and with time and with regular exposure. So the example it gives on this slide as well, you know, if a loud siren was to go off at the same time every day, the first time that you heard it, you'd probably jump a mile in the air. But over time, when you're expecting it and you knew it was there, you might get to the stage where it didn't bother you, and some people just might get to the stage where they hardly noticed it happening anymore. So because of the way that our fight and flight response is set up, it's quite often unfamiliar sensations or situations that trigger it, because we don't know if we're going to be safe. So we need to be on high alert just in case we need to do something about it. And what the brain does, it compares any new experiences to things that we've done or seen in the past to work out if there is a threat and if we need to do something about it or not. So quite often the more sensory experiences we have, the brain's got more to work with and compare with, and it's less likely that the panic response will be triggered by mistake. So if we regularly complete self-care activities whilst we're calm and in control, this can eventually reduce that touch sensitivity for many over-responders. But as I put at the bottom, that's the key thing, is that you're doing it while you're calm. If you're doing it while you're on high alert, it's not going to have the same calming effect, and if anything, it might make it worse, which is why sometimes it's better to do something. You know, if your child really hates to clean their teeth, it's better to do it just for very short bursts rather than a thorough one, because they can be calm for that, and gradually they'll get used to it and they'll be able to tolerate it for longer and longer. So the next system we're going to talk about is our visual system. And again, I'm not going to, quite a complicated system, I'm not going to go into it in full detail, but we've got special cells at the back of our eyeballs that are specially made to pick up light, colour and movement. And again, all of our vision is made up from past experiences. So if we just saw the picture but we hadn't interacted with things, we still wouldn't understand what they were. We need to actually have had that hands-on experience and move and see and feel in order to actually work out what the pictures are that we're seeing. And again, the brain is super clever and it's very good at grouping visual information into bundles so that we can process things faster. We don't need to look at every individual thing. And this system works when we're reading. We don't need to read every single letter. We can read groups of letters so that we can read words and sentences a lot faster. And I think we're going to look at this picture, this video clip in a minute, because quite often what we see and what we think we see can vary depending on what we focus on, and I think it's nicely illustrated by this little clip here. So let's pop this on now.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
So I don't know how many people did spot the gorilla. I certainly did not the first time that I watched it. It gave me quite a shock. So for this next slide, I'd like you to go back to the worksheet and then find the one on vision. That should be the next one in the sheet. And again, I would give you just a couple of minutes just to have a look through that and see how it applies to your child. So again, please just, if you've not finished, please just pause the presentation so you get a chance to finish this. So to think a little bit about strategies then for vision, for children who over-respond, you can try seeing different accessories to cut out excess vision. So things like having a hat with a cap with a large peak, or a hat with a brim, or wraparound glasses. It just reduces the overall volume and some of the things that you're seeing at the periphery that you don't really need. I mean, usually when the system's working well, we will just ignore things that are happening at sort of our peripheral side vision, but some children are really sensitive to that, and so actually having things that can physically block that out can be really, really helpful. So if you can see just above my head on the video, there's some picture there of some tinted glasses, and again, some people with dyslexia find these helpful for reading, especially if you find that the words jumble around a little bit when you're trying to read. But other people who just generally are a little bit over responsive to vision can find these quite helpful as well. It just takes away some of the glare and some of the contrast. There's different colours, but again, it would be something, if you wanted to explore it, that you'd need to try. I can't really advise a specific colour for a specific person. It would be a try it and see approach really for that one. And the other thing as well is just if you really notice the smallest detail, it's trying to have quite a neutral, plain decor at home. And again, you know, some of the children who I work with notice the slightest little crack in any glaze in a plate or anything on a wall surface. So those children who notice the slightest little change in the surface are going to really, really struggle if there's busy wallpaper and lots of changes in colour. So it's trying to keep it quite minimalistic for those children. And again, for some children, you might even need to be quite mindful about what you wear and not wear anything that's too patterned or, you know, have too elaborate jewellery, because it might just be really, really overwhelming for them. So the children who under-respond to sensation, again, there's lots of activities that you can do that can actually help to build on visual skills. So things like the Where's Wally books can be quite good, where children have got to really practice that skill of looking for things when there's lots of other things to find. And again, you can also play like Hunt the Thingy game. So I would choose something that's really motivating for your child. It might be like a little figure toy or something like that, and hide that somewhere for them to find. Again, grade it depending on how good their skills are at the starting point. If they really struggle, have it so that it looks really obvious to you, and then as their skills increase, you can start to hide it behind things, but I would hide it in plain sight to start off with. So again, a lot of children who under-respond to visual find it really hard to sort of visually scan and work out what's going on in their environment, and so they need everything to be really, really organised and clearly laid out for them. So again, it's things like, you know, with their toys, with their clothing and wardrobe, you might need to have things, you know, maybe you could always use colour themes. So certain toys are themed in a certain way. You might need to have, like on the picture there, an image on the front of the drawer of what's in that particular drawer to help them to find it. But again, I think less is more, so not having too much stuff for them to have to look at one time is really helpful. And as you can see by the picture at the top, with the plate on the red mat, sometimes having a colour contrast can help, because it just draws your eye in and you can see the plate a lot more clearly. But again, you could use a placemat underneath homework or a play activity, something to help them to stay focused. So the next sense that we're going to talk about is our sense of hearing. And this is a very complicated system. I'm not going to go into it in vast amounts of depth. But basically we've got little eardrums right deep inside the ear that detects the sound waves going in, and it turns these into an electrical signal, which can then be sent to the brain. So our hearing enables us to do all sorts of things, including things like working out what direction a sound is coming from. We can differentiate between different volumes of sound, different tones, different pitches, different rhythms of sound. And I think the key one when we're talking about sensory differences, it helps us to tune out background noise and focus on what we need to focus on. So it could be a teacher, somebody talking to us, the TV, etc. So if you can then turn to the sound page in the book, and I will again just give you a few minutes to have a look at this. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide, but again, please just pause it if you need a little bit of extra time. So then, thinking about strategies for children who might over or under respond to sound. So again, for your over responders, I think the key thing to do is to give them a sense of control over the situation. So it could be things like noise reducing or noise cancelling headphones. And again, I think these are getting a lot cheaper to buy now. They were phenomenally expensive to start off with, but I think you can get them that are fairly decent for a reasonable price these days. But again, you know, don't go expensive first. Try cheaper things. So something like earmuffs might be a good place to start. You can get them fairly cheaply, and you can get specialist ear defenders. So if you see the picture at the top, that's what they look like. So a bit like industrial earmuffs, ear defenders, but child-sized. The thing that I will say here, though, is these are really not recommended to be used for any longer than needed, because when you've got a child who's wearing ear defenders, they're not being exposed to everyday noise levels. So actually it can, you know, if you've got a child who's very anxious about sound and they wear these all the time, they won't take them off, they become more sensitive. So they can be really helpful, so I wouldn't say not to use them at all. And some children find it helpful just to have them with them if they've got to go somewhere noisy, like assembly, or they've got to go to the supermarket. But really make sure they're used very carefully, only when it's noisy. And as soon as the noise levels go down, make sure that your child takes them off again. I think as well, that's why sometimes I prefer wearing headphones, because at least if you've got headphones on, you're still listening to some sounds and not listening to nothing. And again, just be aware as well, because sometimes you can get ear infections and things quite easily if you wear tight-fitting ear defenders all the time. So just to be really aware of that one. And the other thing that might be helpful as well is if you've got to be in a noisy situation, to say, and I know there's been some schools who have done this, if there's something like a school bell that goes off, a fire alarm that needs to be tested, sometimes this can be really anxiety provoking for children, because again, they don't know when to expect the noise, but they know it's coming, so they can get really, really anxious about it. If they can be in charge of it, again, they can put their headphones on first, then they know exactly when it's coming, and that can help reduce some of the anxiety about it as well. So what we can do as well, if there's specific noises that children are really struggling with, is try and do like a graded exposure approach to a noise. So say if they were really worried about hoovering, you know, maybe if you've got a hoover, you can change the settings on it. Then maybe you could put it on a quieter setting so it's got less suction, and hoover as far away from your child as possible. And then as they get used to that, you can gradually, you know, do it a little bit nearer, maybe turn the volume of it up a little bit as well. And again, you can maybe use things like YouTube with the volume turned down, so things like fireworks, which can be difficult for a lot of children, but might be nice to look at. You could look at them with the volume off, and then you could gradually increase the volume just so they're becoming a little bit more familiar with that by having that regular exposure. So for children who under-respond to sound, again, you might need to use it might be hard to get their attention by talking to them alone, and I think particularly it's making a class teacher aware that they might not pick things up if they're just being told it verbally. So you might need to use their other senses. You need to give them a wave, give them a tap on the shoulder, but obviously depending on their other needs, don't do that if they're sensitive to touch. You might need to speak quite slowly if you've got somebody who under-responds to sound, and they will need a lot longer to just make sense of and process what they've been told. So again, maybe just use keywords. So rather than, oh, please can you go upstairs and go and get your coat, just say upstairs, coat, thanks. And as well, things like a visual flashcard or maybe a Makaton sign, just to reinforce the message, can be helpful as well. So this brings us to the end of section 2, and the book that I'd like to recommend in this one is a book called Creating Sensory Play at Little or No Cost by the Play Doctors, and it's got lots of fun ideas of how to use everyday household items to create sensory play. So again, you might want to take another screen break now, but when you're ready to go on to the next section, please go back onto YouTube, that makes sense, and then select part 3, the special senses. Thanks very much.